the Human Resources Committee here at Somerset Council. I am chair in my capacity as executive lead member for transformation, human resources and localities. This committee has the powers delegated to it by full council in human resource policy. The committee meets as and when required and will report as necessary to full council. It is worth noting that the principal functions of the HR committee are to determine, monitor, review, amend staffing policies and practices to secure the best use and development of the council's staff, including the power to deal with all matters relating to staff terms and conditions. Today's meeting will be run using the webcasting system via Microsoft Teams. Committee members and key officers are physically present in the council chamber here at Dean House, Taunton. Other elected members of the public and officers may physically or remotely join the meeting to speak on specific agenda items or observe. The agenda pack is available via ModGov or directly from the council website from the link which has been sent out to members. When you are invited to speak, please could you speak clearly into the microphone, as I hope I am demonstrating now. State who you are for the benefit of anybody who is listening to the meeting so that they could identify who is speaking. Please remember to turn off microphones and cameras when not speaking, apart from the meeting chair. There is a facility in MS Teams under the ellipsis button called Turn on Live Captions, which provides subtitles on screen. Please be advised that the meeting is being audio-video recorded. As the agendas are now viewed electronically, could I kindly request that members and officers refer to page numbers for the published agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. Finally, there are no planned fire drills today, and in the event of a fire alarm, please follow the fire exit signs and congregate in the car park. Anybody present might need assistance in exiting the building, then please let one of the Democratic Services team know. That brings us on to item 1, apologies for absence. Debbie, do we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We've got Councillor Faye Purbrick, who's given her apologies. There is no substitute for her. Councillor Tony Robbins and Councillor Heather Shearer is substituting for him. Councillor Graham Oakes, and for him, the substitute is Councillor Frederica Smith-Roberts.
Thank you very much. And we've also had a message from Councillor Emily Pearlstone, who is on her way. Oh, she's there. Could have brought my other contacts. Yes. Great to see you, Emily. Fantastic. Okay, so that brings us on to item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any additional interests to declare? No? Okay, that brings us on to item 3, public question time. Do we have any public questions? No, Debbie tells me we have no public questions. Which brings us on to item 4, the Pay Award 2024-25. And I'd like to invite Sari Bryce to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sari Bryce. I'm Strategic Manager, HR Practice. I've got some slides which Debbie's just about up for me. Thank you, Debbie. Next slide. The agenda today is for a single item, which is to consider the cost of living increase for 2024 for staff. So we have a nationally agreed pay award for Green Book staff, which was recently agreed at 2.5%. The details of that are in Annex 1 the report. That is one that we are part of national pay bargaining. So for the purposes of this committee, it's just for you to note. In terms of the other 2 categories of staff that today's agenda is considering, it's looking at the Chief Exec's pay award and the pay award for Chief Officers. This is because Somerset County Council opted out of national pay bargaining for both of those groups of staff, and as the continuing authority, this position remains for Somerset Council. The HR committee therefore acts as the remuneration body for the determination of any salary, cost of living progression for both the chief executive and chief officers. Just for you to note, if any increase is agreed to the chief exec's pay, then that will require approval of full council, so will be a recommendation from this committee. And for your information and background there, the pay awards that were agreed for local authority chief executives, which was agreed in May this year, was based at 2.5%, and the nationally agreed pay award for chief officers, which was agreed in July 24, was also agreed at 2.5%. So that's in line with what the Green Book staff are also receiving. Next slide, please, Debbie. So all appointments to executive and service directors are made on a spot salary. The executive director salaries are currently set within a range of 129,000 to 150,000. Service directors, there are 3 levels. I won't go through all 3, but you can see them there. Repeated myself to remind you that the nationally paid award for Green Book was 2.5%, just in case you haven't realised that. So the proposal that this paper is putting forward is for a 2.5% increase, which equates to a 0.121, so 121,000, based on the structure as of the 1st of April. Obviously, you appreciate there's been changes to the structures from the 1st of November. Slide, please. So set out there are 3 options set out in the paper. Option 1, which is the one that is recommended committee to consider, is that a 2.5% award is applied to both the chief executive and to the chief officers, so service directors and executive directors. However, you do need to note that it is actually open to the council to follow that agreement or to follow any other agreement for the JNC, but as they're the same, it would make no difference. And the details of what that means in terms of pay increases is set out in Annex 2 of the report. Slide, please. I've put 2 other options in the paper, so it is open to you as a committee to apply a different percentage increase to those that have been agreed nationally. If this option were to be considered, the advice is that any percentage increase does not exceed 2.5%, as that is in line with the pay award for Green Book staff. Option 3, which is to freeze the current pay for both the chief exec and the chief officers, that is currently applied with no pay increase for the period April 24 to March 25. In terms of consultation, the Green Book pay award is, as a nationally agreed pay award, is being subject to national pay negotiations with the recognised trade unions at the Joint Negotiation Forum, and has been considered by the Joint Negotiation Forum for those trade unions in Somerset. Union members have been consulted throughout as to their views on the pay offer, and the recognised unions did conduct a national ballot of their members, but that did not result in any action being taken. A summary recommendation of the proposal for the chief exec and chief officers has been circulated to the recognised trade union representatives of the council's joint consultative forum for information and responses. No responses have been received. So the recommendations there are 3 recommendations in the report. One is to note the nationally agreed Green Book pay award for 24-25. That's set out in paragraph 1.2 of the report, and the updated Somerset salary rates for grades 17 to 4 are set out in Appendix 1. Recommendation 2 is to agree a 2.5% cost of living increase chief officers, which is executive directors and service directors for the financial year 24-25. That is set set out in paragraph 2.5 of the report. And then the final recommendation is to make a recommendation to full council that a 2.5% increase is awarded to the chief executive for the financial year 24-25. Again, that is set out in paragraph 2.5 of the report. The end of my presentation. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Sorry, do we have any questions? Councillor Smith-Roberts and then Councillor Shearer.
Mine's actually a question on whether it's for this committee or just for future thoughts as to why we don't go back into the national pay negotiations, because I would assume then it's an easier process for everybody involved, but I could be wrong on that, but I don't see why we're now out of it.
Yes, sorry.
Certainly as a committee, that's absolutely one of the options that you could decide to make. If you're going to do that, though, we would not be able to get it in place, I don't believe, for, well, we might be able to get in for 25, 26, but we'd have to make that decision probably before the beginning of the new year, because we'd have to take that back through our trade union. So I can't see that there'd be any major problems. But if you are going to make that decision, then my advice would be that that's either done at this committee or we bring that back to the next committee in January for you to make a decision on.
I don't think it's something we can decide today because we haven't really published that we're considering it or discussed it properly, but I think it's something that perhaps we do want to have on the agenda, consider putting on the agenda for January. I know I said Councillor Shearer next, but I suspect does Councillor Fothergill's comment relate directly to this? So I'll go to him first.
Thank you very much. Yes, it does. I can't remember the background to it, but I do remember a number of years back that it was to our advantage that we were outside of the arrangements. Now, I can't remember the exact circumstances why. So before we agree to it, I think we should have a paper which gives you the advantages and the disadvantages, because just to jump back in might be nice and tidy, but it might actually restrict some decisions you want to make in the future, I'd say.
I completely agree with that. I think we should bring it back in January just to make sure we've given it proper consideration and then can come to a conclusion one way or another. Okay, Councillor Shearer.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that. The couple of questions I had, one was, and I agree entirely, I think if we're ever going to go back in or consider going back into it, absolutely it needs to be a full report and time given to it and so on. A couple of questions I had, and I think David might have answered one of them, which is around, because it says the legacy, it's a legacy situation where she gets sat with the county council as was. I don't remember whether it was in the districts. I think it might just have been with the county. And the other question, two other questions therefore. I mean, on the face of it, to me, it seems quite straightforward to go with the recommendation. I've not seen anything in the paper that makes me think we should do anything different other than the recommendation, but I'm happy to listen to anyone else's questions, comments. One was about, have we ever really deviated in recent years from going with the national recommendations? And the other one is there some possible worry about doing this that I can't see? Any possible risk to our organisation or risk to our employees or anything like that? Because I can't see one. Is there any risk? And I couldn't see it in the paper if there were.
Sorry.
Thank you. Those questions. In terms of previous, sorry, I'll just get back to the first part, the district councils. I don't believe any of them were opted out of national pay negotiations for chief execs and chief officers. In terms of previous years, that's a, I was going to say I could give you a straight answer, but it's actually not as straightforward as that, because last year, if you recall, and you may not, there was no award made to service directors and exec directors because they were newly appointed from the 1st of April. And it was agreed that the salaries that were put in place from the 1st of April included the pay award. So there was no pay award given last year as such. And in terms of the chief exec, yes, again, we've had a similar situation where when he first started, he was not awarded a pay award the following year. So we have deviated, if you like, from the nationally agreed recommendations or awards that have been made. In terms of risks, I guess the risks are around retention. I think that would be your biggest risk.
I think the question was more, what's the risk of doing it rather than what's the risk of not doing it?
The risk. Okay. That's a more interesting one in terms of how you respond to that. So, I mean, there's a risk in terms of perception, obviously, in terms of you know, a group, your highest paid individuals, and how that will be perceived by the rest of the organisation, particularly when we are in a financial emergency and when you as a committee have the power to make the decision.
Thank you, sorry. Councillor Redden.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points really. Just some first one is a bit of clarification. The paper talks about the cost of living pay rise for our staff. Obviously, there's the question of living wage and cost of living and all those sorts of things. And one of the things that was previously a point of reference for councils was the multiplier ratio between the chief executive and the lowest level, and that was always something that was published alongside of this. It fell off for some reason with an idea that gap should be an aspiration of all councils, all employers should be that gap should be reducing. I just wondered what the multiplier was in relation to now, whether that's getting bigger or smaller, and if it's not included in this, if we can have some clarification about it, because we should be the aspiration, as I say, for a council should be that our lowest paid scale should be improved as much as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Redman. Yeah, you're quite right. We absolutely have to publish that information, and that information is included in pay policy statement, which will come to January HR committee. I can certainly get that information for you if you are ahead of that committee. Normally, we would bring this paper to that committee at the same time. We haven't done it this time.
Thank you for the clarification, Chair, and thank you. It was just it's a useful reminder that how important our staff are, and I'm sure as this committee would be hoping to close the gap as much as possible. Well, yeah, full stop.
Thanks for that contribution. Helpful. Do we have any other contributions around the room? In which case, do we have the recommendations in front of us are that the members of the HR committee are asked to note the nationally agreed Green Book Pay Award for 2024-25 as outlined in paragraph 1.2 below, and the updated Somerset salary rates for grades 17 to 4 at Appendix 1. To agree that a 2.5% pay award is awarded to the chief officers, executive directors and service directors for the financial year 2024-25 as outlined in paragraph 2.5 below, and to make a recommendation to full council that a 2.5% increase is awarded to the chief executive for the financial year 2024-25 as outlined in paragraph 2.5 below. I'm going to propose that from the chair.
Chair, clarification, you're taking it en bloc or each individual
I'm taking it en bloc unless anyone advocates for taking them individually. The first one is merely to note, so it's a question of whether anyone wants to take the second two individually. Unless anyone's advocating that we do something differently, I don't see the benefit of doing that, in which case I'm proposing them en bloc. Do I have a seconder? Seconded Councillor Wakefield. All those in favour? Any against? Anyone wishing to register an abstention? Noted, but that is clearly carried. Councillor Fothergill, before I close the meeting.
Could I suggest that when it's presented to full council, it would be really helpful because the pay award is from March. I think April. I think it'd be worth recording clearly in the papers what the rate of inflation was in April, because clearly it's dropped since. But if people understand what it was back in April, it will help to show that 2.5 is not. It's not over generous. No, not at all. I just think that in terms of positioning, that would be really quite important.
Thank you, Councillor Fothergill. That's a very helpful suggestion. That is the entirety of the agenda's business concluded, and so that is the end of the meeting. Thank you all very much for your attendance and participation.